Evelyn Carter stood behind the polished glass counter of her boutique, the scent of high-end perfume lingering in the air. She carefully wrapped an elegant silk scarf for a longtime client, her hands moving with practiced precision. The bell above the door chimed as Mrs. Lawson exited, her heels clicking against the marble floor. Everything about the boutique radiated success, from the curated designer collections to the tasteful decor Evelyn had meticulously designed. Then her phone vibrated. A simple notification, one text message. She reached for it absent-mindedly, expecting an update from a supplier or a message from one of her employees. Instead, her breath hitched slightly as she read the words staring back at her. I'm leaving you and moving to Miami with Mia. I've emptied our joint account. Goodbye. Jason, her husband of 12 years. Evelyn didn't move. She didn't gasp, cry, or feel the world collapse around her the way he probably imagined she would. The only indication of her shock was a slight narrowing of her eyes, a tightening of her grip around her phone. The betrayal, though sharp, was not unexpected. Jason had been acting strangely for months, sudden work meetings that stretched into the night, whispers on calls that ended the moment she entered the room, a newfound obsession with fitness, and an abrupt interest in new clothes. He was trying to reclaim his youth, and Evelyn had noticed. She had noticed the late-night transactions at expensive restaurants, the charges for boutique hotels in the city, the way his phone was always turned away from her. 3 months ago, she had found a receipt tucked between paperwork on his desk, a dinner for 2 at a 5-star steakhouse, dated on an evening when he had sworn he was working late. That same night, she had opened a separate bank account. A week later, when Jason suggested they combine all their finances for simplicity, she had smiled and agreed. She let him believe she trusted him, and while she continued depositing just enough into their joint account to keep up appearances, she had quietly moved her personal savings elsewhere, away from his reach. Now standing in the soft glow of her boutique's display lights, she exhaled slowly. Jason believed he had won, that he had pulled off some grand escape, leaving her devastated and financially crippled. How little he truly knew her. Without hesitation, Evelyn unlocked her phone, scrolling through her banking app. The joint account was empty, as expected. What Jason didn't realize was that it had contained only enough to sustain their regular expenses for 2 months, just enough to lull him into a false sense of security. The boutique, the real estate investments, her savings, everything of true value was untouched, secure. Another message arrived. Don't bother begging. Mia and I leave tomorrow. I'll send for my things later. Mia, the receptionist from Jason's office, barely out of her 20s, eager to attach herself to a man who had promised her a life of luxury. Evelyn had met her at the company's holiday party, had watched the way she laughed too eagerly at Jason's jokes, how she touched his arm when she thought no one was looking. The girl was young and naive, believing she had won some grand prize. Evelyn's lips curved slightly, though it wasn't quite a smile. Jason had played his move, and now it was her turn. She dialed her lawyer, the same one she had consulted 2 months ago when she had started gathering evidence of Jason's financial deceit. The preparations had already been made. It was time to put them into action. By the time she arrived home, the house, her house, which she had inherited from her grandmother and never put Jason's name on, despite his repeated suggestions, was quiet. She poured herself a glass of wine and settled into the plush leather chair in her study. The moonlight streamed through the large bay windows, casting a silver glow across the room, her boutique. The business she had built from nothing, which generated more income than Jason's middle management job ever had. He had always dismissed it as a hobby, failing to recognize that it was the foundation of her independence. She took a sip of wine, enjoying the rich taste as she forwarded Jason's texts to her lawyer, adding them to the growing file. His arrogance would be his undoing. The final move was simple. A quick call to the credit card company reporting fraudulent activity. 2 first-class tickets to Miami canceled. Hotel reservations at a 5-star resort canceled. By morning, Jason and Mia would arrive at the airport, expecting a grand escape, only to find themselves stranded. No luxurious hotel, no celebratory champagne in the sky. Just the cold realization that his plan had unraveled before it had even begun. Evelyn turned off her phone and leaned back in her chair. The night was calm, and for the first time in months, so was she. Jason thought he had won. But the real game had only just begun. The boutique bustled with customers, the soft hum of conversation filling the air as Evelyn Carter arranged a new display of luxury handbags. The scent of fresh flowers and high-end perfume drifted through the space, creating the refined ambiance her clientele adored. She smiled as she handed a shopping bag to a loyal customer, her demeanor poised, unshaken. To the world, she was the picture of composure. Inside, she was watching, waiting, knowing that Jason's world was unraveling by the second. Her phone vibrated in her pocket. Another message. "What did you do? Our credit cards aren't working." She didn't bother opening it. Jason had likely just arrived at the airport, expecting a seamless transition into his new life with Mia, only to be met with confusion at the counter. No tickets, no hotel reservation, no access to his usual financial safety nets. Evelyn exhaled softly, resisting the urge to laugh. Jason had always been a man of arrogance, someone who never considered that the woman he had underestimated might be steps ahead of him. While he had been planning his escape, she had been securing her future. She slid her phone back into her pocket and continued greeting customers, unfazed by his increasing desperation. By mid-afternoon, her phone rang again. This time, it wasn't Jason, it was his mother, Barbara. Evelyn almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. She leaned against the marble counter, pressing the phone to her ear, expecting the usual condescension. Barbara wasted no time. "I cannot believe what you've done. Jason told me everything. How you locked him out of his own finances, how you ruined his fresh start." Evelyn listened, letting the accusations wash over her. Then in the same measured tone she had perfected over the years, she read out Jason's texts, the smug message about emptying their joint account, the mockery about her boutique, his confession about planning this for months. Each word was a weight, a truth that Barbara had been unwilling to see before. Silence stretched across the line, then a quiet, hesitant breath. By the time she ended the call, the shift had already begun. Jason's carefully constructed escape was crumbling, and it wasn't just Barbara who was beginning to doubt him. Mia, once enamored by the fantasy of running away with a man who promised her the world, had begun to see the cracks. On social media, she had started posting vague messages, cryptic complaints about broken promises and things not being what they seemed. The same friends who had once cheered for her whirlwind romance were now questioning her choices. Meanwhile, Jason had been forced to check into a budget motel. No luxury suites, no ocean view balcony. Just a cramped, dimly lit room with stiff sheets and the lingering scent of desperation. That night, Evelyn sat in her home, the house Jason had once tried to claim, now legally and undeniably hers, and poured herself another glass of wine. As she scrolled through her phone, she saw the inevitable had happened. Jason had started calling their mutual friends, spinning tales of how Evelyn had stolen from him, how she had been waiting for the chance to ruin him. None of it mattered. With the court order she had filed, his remaining assets were frozen. A forensic accountant was already combing through his transactions, looking for any hidden funds or questionable dealings. Every move he made, she had already anticipated. Jason had expected Evelyn to fall apart, to beg, to be consumed by his betrayal. Instead, she thrived. The next morning, her boutique saw a surge of customers, women who had heard whispers of what had happened, who admired her resilience. Some came under the guise of shopping, but she could see the curiosity in their eyes, the subtle nods of approval as they left with their purchases. Jason's world was unraveling. Evelyn's, on the other hand, was just beginning. Evelyn sat in the sterile, impersonal space of the courtroom, her fingers laced together as she listened to the steady, measured voice of her attorney. The walls around her seemed to press in, holding the weight of finality, yet she felt lighter than she had in months. Across the room, Jason fidgeted in his chair, shifting uncomfortably, his posture rigid with the discomfort of a man who had spent too long believing he would never face the consequences of his actions. His arrogance had carried him this far, but today that arrogance had met its match. The judge called the case to order, and Evelyn remained still, her heartbeat steady, her face unreadable. Jason had once believed himself untouchable, that charm and manipulation would always allow him to slip free of accountability. But the truth had no patience for charisma. The financial records laid bare his deception, each withdrawal, each frivolous expense, every last cent he had siphoned from their joint account to fund his fantasy of escape. The receipts told a story of betrayal better than any words could. The records came first, a meticulous dissection of his financial misconduct. Luxury hotels, fine dining, expensive gifts, all documented, all undeniable. Jason's paper trail was damning, a self-authored confession of greed and entitlement. Evelyn had expected him to attempt defiance, to hold on to the false confidence he wielded so effortlessly, but as his lawyer sifted through the documents, the facade was beginning to slip. Then came the texts, the cruel, mocking messages Jason had sent in the moment of his so-called triumph. They were projected for the courtroom to see, his own words, sealing his fate. Every arrogant boast, every taunt, every gleeful admission of theft was now evidence against him. The room remained still as the judge read aloud Jason's final, careless words. I emptied the account. Good luck surviving without me. It had been intended as a final blow, a parting shot meant to leave Evelyn crumbling. But it had instead become the very thing that would bury him. His defense was weak, pathetic even. He painted himself as the victim, spinning a story of dissatisfaction and emotional neglect. He spoke of a marriage that had left him cold, of a wife who had been too distant, too focused on her business to see him. But the judge remained unimpressed. Words meant nothing against numbers. Evelyn sat quietly as her attorney dismantled Jason's flimsy justifications with cold, undeniable facts. The boutique had always been hers, built long before he came into the picture. The accounts had been separate, legally protected, with only the joint account holding funds he had access to. His attempt to claim any share of her business profits was laughable. The judge wasted no time. Jason was ordered to repay every cent he had stolen. His desperate claim to Evelyn's assets was dismissed outright. His punishment was clear. He would leave this courtroom with nothing but debt, his possessions reduced to what he had managed to pack before fleeing to Miami. There was no sympathy to be found for a man who had so openly reveled in his own cruelty. But it was the final ruling that broke him. Jason had expected to walk away with something. He had convinced himself that at the very least, he could manipulate the system into granting him some form of financial cushion. Instead, he was being left with nothing, Worse than nothing, he was drowning in legal fees and restitution orders, his dreams of luxury reduced to dust in an instant. Evelyn watched as the realization dawned on him, as the weight of his actions finally settled onto his shoulders. He turned toward her, his expression unreadable, as if searching for some kind of reaction. But she had none to give him. There was nothing left between them. No anger, no grief, not even resentment, only indifference. The proceedings concluded, and Jason was escorted from the courtroom. Evelyn rose with practiced grace, smoothing the fabric of her dress, adjusting the strap of her bag. There was no satisfaction in watching him fall. This was never about revenge. It had always been about reclaiming what was hers. Outside, the world carried on as if nothing had changed. The streets were busy, the air humming with the rhythm of life. Evelyn inhaled deeply, letting the cool breeze ground her. Jason had believed he was writing her downfall, that his betrayal would leave her shattered. Instead, he had done something else entirely. He had freed her. The consequences of Jason's actions rippled through his carefully constructed facade. His family, once blindly loyal, had turned cold. His mother, who had been so quick to blame Evelyn for his failures, now saw the truth in his lies. Mia, the woman he had sacrificed everything for, had abandoned him the moment the financial reality set in. The fantasy had crumbled, and Jason was left to sift through the wreckage alone. Evelyn, on the other hand, had no wreckage to sort through. She had taken every step to protect herself, to ensure that when the inevitable betrayal came, she would not be the one left struggling to rebuild. She had not just survived Jason's departure, she had thrived in its wake. Her boutique flourished, drawing in more customers than ever. Women who had heard whispers of her story came to support her, drawn to the quiet strength she exuded. Every purchase, every kind word, every small act of solidarity reinforced what Evelyn had always known. She was more than the man who had betrayed her. Jason had lost everything, and Evelyn had gained something invaluable: peace. And as she walked away from the courthouse, she did not look back. 6 months had passed since the courtroom battle, and Evelyn had never felt stronger. Her boutique had expanded, her customer base had grown, and she had built a new life free from the weight of Jason's betrayal. Every day felt like a quiet victory, a testament to the resilience she had cultivated over the years. She had expected to never hear from him again, to let his downfall play out from a distance while she continued her steady rise. But Jason was never one to let go of a losing hand. The first sign of trouble came in the form of a legal notice delivered to her boutique. A lawsuit. Jason was claiming a right to half of the business, arguing that because they were married during its most successful years, he was entitled to a share of what he had so carelessly dismissed as her little shop. It was laughable, really. The same man who had mocked her ambition, who had stolen from her, who had so gleefully walked away, was now demanding a stake in her success. Evelyn barely batted an eye as she handed the papers over to her lawyer. The boutique had always been in her name alone, a fact carefully documented from its inception. She had learned early on to keep her personal and business finances separate, and that foresight had ensured that Jason had no legal grounds to stand on. The case was weak, desperate, a last-ditch effort from a man who had lost everything and was now grasping for any way to reclaim a piece of her life. Still, Jason did what he did best. He played the victim. Mutual friends started reaching out, their messages carefully worded, their curiosity barely concealed. They had heard Jason's version of the story, that Evelyn had ruthlessly cut him off, that she had taken everything, leaving him destitute while she thrived. He painted himself as the wronged party, a man simply trying to reclaim what was rightfully his. Evelyn let the rumors swirl, refusing to engage. She had nothing to prove to anyone. Those who mattered knew the truth, and besides, she had something far more powerful than words, proof. Her lawyer made quick work of Jason's claim. Financial records painted an undeniable picture. While Evelyn had been investing in her business, Jason had been draining their joint account, spending lavishly on his new life with Mia. Expensive dinners, high-end hotels, luxury gifts, all now carefully itemized and presented as evidence of his financial irresponsibility. The boutique's records, in contrast, showed a meticulously maintained separation from their shared finances. Every dollar that had gone into the business had come from her own earnings, long before Jason had ever imagined himself entitled to it. It didn't take long for the lawsuit to crumble. Jason's own lawyer, upon reviewing the airtight documentation, dropped the case. There was no argument to be made, no loophole to exploit. His last chance at salvaging something from the wreckage of his choices had vanished. And with it, so did his remaining allies. The friends who had initially entertained his sob story now saw the truth. They distanced themselves, unwilling to be associated with a man who had not only betrayed his wife, but had also tried to manipulate the narrative for his own benefit. Mia, too, had long since disappeared from his life, her patience running out when Jason could no longer provide the extravagant lifestyle he had promised her. Jason had nothing left. And that was when he came crawling back. Evelyn was closing up the boutique one evening when she saw him standing outside, his hands stuffed into the pockets of a wrinkled jacket, his posture slumped with defeat. She had imagined this moment once, back when the wounds were still fresh. She had thought about what she would say if he ever returned, if he ever dared to face her again. But now that the moment had arrived, she felt only exhaustion. He looked at her with something resembling remorse, though she knew it was not regret for what he had done, only regret for where it had left him. He had lost his fantasy, had watched his world crumble around him, and now he wanted her to be his safety net. But she was no longer that woman. She stood tall, unwavering, as he muttered empty words about mistakes, about second chances. He was sorry. He wanted to fix things. He had been lost. He tried to remind her of the good times, as if nostalgia could erase the betrayal, as if a few carefully chosen words could undo the damage he had so willfully inflicted. Evelyn let him speak, let him spill whatever he had rehearsed on his way here. And when he finally stopped, when his voice trailed into silence, she met his gaze with a steadiness that left no room for doubt. There was nothing left to say. She turned away, stepping back into her boutique, the space she had built with her own hands, the life she had reclaimed. And as she locked the door behind her, she knew she had just sealed the last chapter of this story. Jason lingered for a moment, as if waiting for something, an opening, a sign that she might change her mind. But there was none. He walked away, and this time, Evelyn didn't watch him go. She didn't need to. She had already moved on. A year had passed, and Evelyn's life had transformed in ways she never could have imagined. Her boutique, once a single store she had built with endless hours of hard work and sacrifice, had expanded into a thriving business. The demand had grown so rapidly that she had opened a second location, something she had once only dreamed about. Now her stores catered to an even larger clientele, and her brand had gained recognition beyond her city. The little shop Jason had mocked had become an empire, and Evelyn was at the center of it all. She had never felt stronger. There was a peace in her life that she hadn't realized she was missing when she was still tied to Jason's chaos. Without his constant drain on her energy, she had found space to grow, not just professionally, but personally. She had surrounded herself with people who genuinely supported her, who celebrated her successes instead of resenting them. And most importantly, she had learned the value of protecting herself, of ensuring that no one could ever take advantage of her again. Meanwhile, Jason's life had taken the trajectory Evelyn always knew it would. His once grand escape had crumbled, leaving him in a position he had never prepared for. After losing his court battle, after Mia had left him, after his own friends had abandoned him, he had been forced to take whatever work he could find. The man who had once looked down on Evelyn's dedication to her business, who had seen himself as superior simply because he had the luxury of stability while she worked tirelessly to build something from nothing, was now struggling to stay afloat. Rumors floated back to Evelyn through mutual acquaintances. Jason was working a low-wage job, barely making ends meet. His attempts to re-enter the dating scene had been a disaster. Women had heard about his past, about his attempts to manipulate and control, and wanted nothing to do with him. His reputation had followed him, a shadow that he couldn't escape. He was now the cautionary tale that others whispered about, the man who had thrown away a life of comfort for fleeting excitement, only to be left with nothing. Evelyn, on the other hand, had become an inspiration. She had been invited to speak at a business conference on financial independence, a topic she had once never imagined herself an expert in. Standing before an audience filled with ambitious women, she shared her story. Not the pain, not the betrayal, but the lessons. She spoke about protecting assets, about trusting instincts, about never allowing anyone to have full control over your future. When the event ended, women approached her with admiration in their eyes. They told her how her journey had given them the courage to take control of their own lives. Some were starting businesses, some were leaving toxic relationships, some were simply reassessing the way they handled their finances. Seeing the impact she had, Evelyn realized something profound. This was what real power looked like. Not revenge, not anger, but the ability to rise above and turn pain into purpose. It was during this time that Mia unexpectedly reached out. The message was long, filled with regret and an attempt at an apology. She admitted that she had been naive, that she had believed Jason's promises, that she had genuinely thought she was stepping into something better. But in the end, she had just been another casualty of his selfishness. Evelyn read the message carefully. Once she might have wanted this, to hear Mia admit that she had made a mistake, to see her suffer the consequences of her choices. But now, she felt nothing but detachment. She responded with a short but polite reply, acknowledging the apology, but making it clear that they would never be friends. There was no reason to hold on to resentment, but there was also no reason to reopen a door that had long since been closed. Sitting in her office that evening, overlooking the boutique that had once been her entire world, Evelyn reflected on the journey that had brought her here. The pain, the betrayal, the chaos, none of it had mattered in the end. She had not needed to seek revenge. She had not needed to prove anything to Jason or to anyone else. Her success was the answer, her happiness, her freedom, her growth. Those were the only things that mattered. And Jason, wherever he was, struggling to piece together the remnants of his life, had no place in this new world she had built. She had won. Not in the way he had ever understood, not through pettiness or destruction, but by becoming everything he had once tried to hold her back from being. And that was enough. 5 years had passed since Evelyn had received that fateful text from Jason, the one where he had smugly announced his departure, believing he had won. But time had proven just how wrong he was. Standing in the middle of her 5th boutique, surrounded by success that she had built with her own hands, Evelyn felt a deep sense of peace. The grand opening was packed with customers, journalists, and well-wishers, all celebrating the empire she had created. What had once been a small boutique in a quiet corner of the city had transformed into a brand recognized across the country. Each store opening had been another milestone, another testament to her resilience. She had done it all without him. Jason's fate, on the other hand, had followed the path she had always expected. Over the years, whispers of his downfall had made their way to her. He had struggled to keep a stable job, bouncing between low-paying positions that barely covered his expenses. His reckless choices had caught up to him, and the people who had once supported him had long since turned away. His family had cut him off, tired of his excuses and his inability to take responsibility for his own life. And Mia, she had left him long ago. The young receptionist, who had once been enamored by his false promises, had quickly realized the reality of being with a man who had nothing to offer. She had moved on, while Jason had remained stuck in the ruins of the life he had so carelessly destroyed. Evelyn had no interest in keeping up with his misfortunes, but fate had a way of bringing things full circle. That morning, as she was preparing for the grand opening, an unexpected email had arrived in her inbox. It was from Jason. She hadn't heard from him in years, but there it was, his name staring back at her from the subject line. For a brief moment, she hesitated. Did she even want to read it? Against her better judgment, she clicked. It was exactly what she had expected. Self-pity, excuses, regret. Jason rambled about how hard things had been for him, how he had been struggling, how unfair life had been. He had lost everything, his money, his job, his support system. He wrote about the good times they had shared, about how much he missed the stability they once had. He hinted at wanting a second chance, though he never outright asked for one. Evelyn didn't need to read any further. Without another thought, she moved her cursor to the delete button and pressed it. She didn't need closure from him. She didn't need to know what had become of his life. His fate was no longer of any concern to her. As she stepped out into the bustling boutique, taking in the success she had built, she smiled. She had won. Not through revenge, not through bitterness, but by thriving, by building a life that Jason could never take from her. And for the first time in years, she realized she no longer thought of him at all. Evelyn's story is a powerful lesson in resilience, preparation, and self-worth. Values that are essential in today's world. Too often, people invest everything into relationships, trusting blindly, only to be betrayed. But Evelyn's ability to foresee trouble, safeguard her assets, and rise above adversity proves that being proactive is the key to surviving betrayal. In real life, financial independence is crucial. Keeping personal and business finances separate, as Evelyn did, ensures security in the face of unexpected events. Never rely entirely on a partner for stability. Always have a plan. Documenting important transactions and maintaining control over your assets can prevent financial ruin if a relationship turns sour. Beyond finances, Evelyn's journey shows the importance of self-respect. She didn't waste time seeking revenge or proving a point. Instead, she focused on success, proving that moving forward is the best response to betrayal. The lesson? Never let someone else define your worth. Whether in relationships, career, or personal growth, always protect yourself. Stand tall in your decisions. And remember, true victory isn't in revenge. It's in building a life that no one can take from you. If Evelyn's story resonated with you, remember, strength isn't just about surviving, it's about thriving. Life doesn't end when someone betrays you. Sometimes it truly begins. If you believe in second chances for yourself, not for those who hurt you, Hit subscribe and join a community of strong, independent women rewriting their own stories. Because the best revenge, it's living well on your own terms.